Let me ask you something. Have you ever been accused of something at work, at home, even in traffic, and before you can think, you jump straight into defense mode? Heart racing, words stumbling, voice raising, and suddenly you look guilty, even when you're not. Here's the truth. Defending yourself isn't the same as standing in your power. In fact, that instant need to explain, to prove, to justify, that's not strength, that's fear. And today, I'm going to show you why you should EVR, defend yourself, and what to do instead. You ever notice how fast we jump into defense mode? Someone questions your intent, and suddenly your heart's pounding, your mouth opens, and you're trying to explain your way out of something that wasn't even your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, but here you are defending your tone, your timing, your choices. And if you've ever walked away from one of those conversations thinking, why did I even say all that? You're not alone. We do it because it's natural. We've been taught, not directly, but through years of subtle messaging, that to be good, to be understood, to be respectable, we have to explain ourselves. That the more someone pushes, the more we have to justify. But here's the problem with that. When you defend yourself, you're not operating from your center. You're reacting. And reaction is never rooted in power. It's rooted in panic. Because when you react, you're responding to their energy, not your own. You're responding to how they feel what they said and how they frame the situation. The moment someone comes at you with criticism, with suspicion, with attitude, and you jump into defense mode, you've already handed them the steering wheel. You let them drive the direction of the conversation. And most of the time, they're not even qualified to be in the driver's seat. See, when someone says something that feels like an attack, the goal isn't always clarity, it's control. It's not always about solving the issue. Sometimes it's about shifting pressure. So the second you start defending yourself, you're telling them of, yes, I accept the premise. I accept that I'm on trial here. And once you're on trial, there's only one possible outcome. You either prove your case or you get judged. And even if you win, you lose. Why? Because now you're exhausted. Now you've spent emotional energy arguing a point you never needed to prove in the first place. Let me give you a real world example. You're at work. You miss a deadline by a couple of hours, not days, just hours, and your manager comes in hot. Why wasn't this in on time? This is unacceptable. Immediately, your brain says, explain, justify, defend, and maybe you do. I had 2 other reports. The system was down. I even stayed late last night, but notice something. Your defense didn't calm the situation. It didn't lead to understanding. It just deepened the tension. Why? Because you responded to their urgency with panic instead of presence. Now imagine a different response, one rooted in calm, same situation, but instead of explaining, you say, I hear your concern. I'm making sure it doesn't happen again. That's it. That's control. That's presence. That's you staying rooted. No panic, no explanation, just ownership of the moment on your terms. See, reacting is emotional, responding is intentional. And that's the difference, because if you always react, you'll always feel like you're one step behind. Like you're cleaning up after conversations instead of leading them. And let me tell you, when you live your life on defense, it's exhausting. It's like trying to walk through your day with your fists up. You can't live like that for long. Now, this doesn't mean you become cold or silent or unfeeling. This isn't about shutting down. It's about knowing that not every question deserves an answer. Not every accusation deserves a counterpoint. Not every raised voice requires your voice to rise with it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet for a beat, breathe, and ask yourself, is this my energy or theirs? And if it's not yours, don't pick it up. Don't carry it. Don't answer it. Because when you react, you serve the moment. But when you respond, you own it. Let them react. You respond. Let me tell you something that might sting a little. The more you explain yourself, the more it sounds like you're making excuses. Now, I know that's hard to hear, especially if you pride yourself on being thoughtful, on communicating well, on wanting people to understand where you're coming from. But hear me out. There's a point when explaining turns into scrambling, into over talking, into trying so hard to prove your good intent that the message underneath gets lost. And what's left? Doubt, confusion, even suspicion. Because here's what people actually hear when you start stacking reasons. You're trying to convince me. You're not certain. You're hoping I'll believe you. And the moment that doubt enters the room, it's hard to get it out. We think that giving someone a detailed backstory, all the whys and what happened was, and I didn't mean it like that, will help clear things up. But what it really does is muddy the waters. It opens more doors for someone to question you, interrupt you, twist your words, or poke holes in what you just said. You end up giving them material they didn't even ask for. You become your own cross-examiner. And it's not because you're wrong. It's not because you don't have a valid point. It's because when you explain too much, it shifts the power. It makes it look like you're trying to win them over. And people can smell that. You know what people respect? Clarity. Calm. Someone who says something once, firmly, clearly, and without the need to dress it up. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone says to you, I feel like you were avoiding me yesterday. The knee-jerk response is to jump into, no, I wasn't. I just had a lot going on. My phone died. Then I had to pick up the kids. And that's defense. That's explanation. That's an invitation for the other person to dig deeper, to question whether that's really the reason. But if you say, I wasn't avoiding you, and stop right there, that's a boundary. That's a statement. That's clarity. And clarity doesn't beg. It doesn't apologize when it doesn't need to. It stands on its own because you're not trying to be believed. You're just telling the truth. And that's a powerful shift. See, when you rely on explanations to feel understood, you're constantly handing people the power to accept or reject you. You're basically saying, here's why I did what I did. Please validate it. But you don't need that. You don't need validation to speak truth. You don't need acceptance to set a boundary. You don't need permission to be clear. The world tells us that over communication is maturity. That talking it out is always the right thing. But the truth is, over communicating can be a mask. It can hide your insecurity. And most of the time, we're not really trying to solve the problem. We're trying to protect how we're perceived. We're trying to protect our image. But your image isn't your job. Your integrity is. So what if instead of stacking explanations, you got comfortable with being misunderstood? What if you didn't rush to correct every wrong impression? What if your focus was less on how people interpret you and more on how you carry yourself? That's not ego. That's strength. That's groundedness. And it changes everything, especially when you're in high stakes moments. Because the people who are most in control of the room aren't the ones talking the most. They're the ones saying the least, but meaning every word. They don't fill silences just to feel safe. They don't need to over-describe or justify. They speak with clarity, and then they let the silence do its job. So if you find yourself explaining, stop and ask, who am I trying to convince? Them or me? And if the answer is, oh, me, then maybe what you need isn't a better explanation. Maybe you just need to believe yourself first. That's the kind of clarity no one can shake. Here's something most people miss in the heat of an argument or a tough conversation. When you start defending yourself, you're no longer telling your story. You're stuck inside theirs. And that's where you lose. Because the moment you begin defending, you've accepted a silent agreement that their version of the story is the one we're working with. That's their assumptions, their framing, their logic is the starting point. And now you're scrambling to rearrange their narrative instead of standing in your own. Let me break that down. Say someone accuses you of being selfish. You didn't even think about how this would affect me. And what do we usually do? We jump into trying to prove them wrong. That's not true. I've always considered you. I only made that decision because I thought it was best for both of us, and on and on. It sounds reasonable. It sounds fair. But in doing that, you're playing their game. You're arguing from as inside their frame. You've accepted that the situation was selfish. Now you're just trying to explain why it wasn't. And when you argue from inside someone else's frame, you're already boxed in. There's no room to move because everything you say now is colored by the assumption you agreed to by defending yourself. And when you do that long enough, you start to lose track of what actually happened, not just in their eyes, but in your own. This is how you get pulled off center. This is how conversations that should take 5 minutes spiral into arguments that take 5 days. Because now you're not discussing what happened. You're navigating what they think it meant. You're in a maze they built with rules they made up. And no matter how well you argue, you never quite get out. And it's not because you're wrong. It's not because you don't have a valid point. It's because you let someone else define what the conversation was before you even got a chance to speak. There's a better way. Instead of jumping into defense mode, pause, breathe, and then ask yourself, is this actually true? Or is this just how they feel? Because those two things aren't the same. Feelings are valid, always, but they don't always tell the full story. And your job isn't to fix someone else's emotions. Your job is to be clear in your own. So when someone tries to drag you into their version of events, don't try to rework their narrative. Step outside it. Speak from your own. You're not required to chase down every accusation and give it oxygen. You're allowed to stay grounded in what you know to be true without running around trying to patch holes in someone else's version. Think of it like this. If someone hands you a script and says, this is your role, now start defending yourself. You don't have to act it out. You can say, I don't agree with that version, and let it sit. That's not being dismissive. That's being anchored. You see, when people come at you emotionally with blame or accusations, it's rarely about truth. It's about emotion, about power, about making sense of their own frustration. And if you start defending yourself, you give their frustration a spotlight. You give their feelings all the control. But if you stay centered, if you stay in your narrative, you shift the whole dynamic. Now they have to come to you. Now they have to meet you in truth, not drag you into drama. That's how you stay in the lead, not by being louder or faster or more convincing, but by staying grounded. Because when you live in reaction, you give up authorship of your own experience. You let someone else write your script. But when you stay grounded in your truth, not defensive, not aggressive, just clear, then you write the story, you set the tone. And the moment you set the tone, you take your power back. We're taught that silence is awkward. That if you don't respond right away, you're losing. That if you pause too long, people will think you don't know what you're doing, or worse, that you're guilty. So we fill the space. We rush in with words, explanations, reactions. But here's the truth most people overlook. Silence is strength. Stillness is control. Because when things get tense, when someone comes at you emotionally, when the energy in the room shifts, when the tone sharpens, the person who stays calm first wins. Not because it's a competition, but because calm people are hard to manipulate. Still people are hard to provoke. And quiet people, the ones who pause before they speak, they don't lose control of the moment. Let's say someone's calling you out in front of others unfairly, publicly, and maybe even intentionally. Your instinct is to speak, to correct the record, to defend your name right then and there, and you can. That's your right. But if you do it from a place of urgency, if you feel that burn to respond as a now, to say something, to not let this slide, you're handing over your calm, you're handing over your energy. You're saying you get to set the temperature and I'll just react to whatever you bring. But if you can pause even for just a breath, you change the temperature of the room. You ever notice how people lean in when someone doesn't respond right away? Silence makes people pay attention. It unsettles them a little. Why? Because most people expect noise. Most people expect you to meet their volume with more volume, their urgency with more urgency. But when you don't, when you breathe instead of bark, when you pause instead of pounce, you take control of the moment without saying a single word. And sometimes that's all that's needed. You don't have to explain yourself in real time just because someone put you on the spot. You're allowed to wait, to think, to say, let me get back to you on that, or I hear you, and nothing more. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you intentional, because there's a difference between reacting and responding, and silence gives you the space to choose. Reaction is quick, emotional, automatic. Response is measured, grounded, deliberate. And if you always react, you're always playing defense. But when you learn to pause, when you get comfortable with stillness, you stop trying to win the moment and you start owning it. Silence also draws boundaries in a way that words sometimes can't. When you refuse to entertain drama, to validate chaos, to match someone's tone, your silence says, I don't engage like that. It communicates respect for yourself. It signals that you're not afraid, you're just not available for the game. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. I've seen people talk themselves into corners because they were afraid of being silent. They explained too much. They rushed to clarify. They said things they didn't mean just to keep the air from feeling heavy. And afterward, they walk away thinking, why did I say all that? It wasn't because they didn't have the right words. It's because they didn't give those words enough room to form. Stillness would have saved them. Here's the truth. Not every comment needs a comeback. Not every accusation deserves a counter. Not every moment is a crisis. But we treat them that way when we're uncomfortable with quiet, when we haven't yet learned that silence is a complete sentence. And sometimes silence is your loudest boundary. You don't need to rush in to fill every silence with justification. You don't need to keep proving that your character is intact. The people who know you don't need convincing, and the people who don't know you probably aren't ready to hear it anyway. So the next time the pressure rises, pause. Don't be so quick to meet energy that doesn't match your peace. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Let's get something straight. Refusing to defend yourself doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It doesn't mean you stay quiet when someone crosses a line. And it definitely doesn't mean you keep the peace at the cost of your own dignity. No, what it means is that instead of wasting energy trying to be understood by people who might not be listening, you learn to set boundaries. Clear, respectful, and firm. See, defending yourself is reactive. It's emotional. It's based on proving you didn't mean harm or that you deserve to be seen differently. But boundaries are proactive. Boundaries don't ask for permission. They don't seek approval. Boundaries say, this is what I allow. This is what I don't, and this is what I'll do next. That's not cold. That's clarity. That's leadership. Over your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth, most of the time when people push us, challenge us, or try to put us on the defensive, what they're really doing is testing our limits. Whether they realize it or not, they're watching how we respond. Do you backpedal? Do you apologize for things you didn't do just to keep things calm? Do you explain yourself into exhaustion? Or do you stand grounded and say, I'm not okay with that? And here's the thing, when you stop defending and start setting boundaries, people notice. They might not like it at first. They might push harder. That's normal, especially if they're used to getting a reaction out of you. But hold your ground, because boundaries teach people how to treat you. Defensiveness invites more pressure. Boundaries create distance from it. Let's say someone says something disrespectful. Maybe they're sarcastic. Maybe they're passive aggressive. Maybe they throw a little jab and look at you like, what? You can't take a joke. Your instinct might be to explain why it bothered you, to give them context, to make them see your side. But that can turn into a loop. You explain, they dismiss. You explain more, they deny. And suddenly you're trying to convince someone to respect you. But you don't have to convince anyone to respect you. Instead, you can simply say, I don't appreciate comments like that. If it happens again, I'm walking away. Period. No debate, no anger, no defending your tone, your mood, or your reaction. Just a clear line. That's not a threat. That's a standard. And the beautiful part is once you stop defending and start leading with boundaries, your energy shifts. You stop chasing closure from people who aren't giving it. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop feeling like you're always one step behind, trying to fix something someone else broke. You reclaim your presence. And let me tell you, people feel that. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to make a scene. When you walk in a room with calm boundaries instead of reactive defenses, people pick up on it. It's in your body language. It's in the way you pause before responding. It's in the way you no longer feel the need to over-explain or to soften the truth just to keep someone comfortable. Because boundaries aren't about walls. They're about doors. Doors you control.